I just want to welcome everyone to the session. This is our 3:15 session of the Boise Neighborhood Interactive 2020. And this session in particular, as you can read on the slide there, is wildfire mitigation and community preparedness, the importance of partnerships and defensible space. So I will leave it to Martha and Jerry.
Great. Hi, my name is Martha. Thank you so much for being here today. I am the Foothills Restoration Specialist with Boise Parks and Recreation. And today I'm going to give an overview of fire mitigation programs on open space reserves. And then Jerry will go into a discussion about homeowner partnerships, as well as other partnerships and how they can all help mitigate the risk of wildfire. So as you may know, the city of Boise owns open space reserves, over 5,000 acres of them. And these reserves are held by the city of Boise for citizens to provide wildlife habitat, clean water, as well as recreational opportunities for people to be outside. There's over 170 miles of trails across city of Boise property, as well as other agencies that are within the Ridge to Rivers Partnership, which include the BLM, Idaho Fish and Game, and the U.S. Forest Service. These properties are a resource to us. As I mentioned, wildlife habitat and clean water are really important in a function of natural ecosystem patterns and processes, but there also is an inherent potential fire hazard when living adjacent to these open spaces. The open space reserves are located in the heart of the sagebrush steppe, which is a vast ecosystem that stretches over Western North America and covers more area than any other type of rangeland on the continent. Though the appearances and composition of sagebrush communities vary greatly across the West, the one thing they have in common is the overstory of sagebrush plants in the genus Artemisia. Artemisia tridentata is the sagebrush that you're going to see out there in the landscape if you walk in the lower Boise foothills. And there's a lot of really interesting facts about Artemisia that I'm not going to get into right now, but the sagebrush is home to a variety of animals such as pronghorn antelope, black-tailed jackrabbit, sage grouse, although we don't have sage grouse here in the lower Boise foothills. If you go up to Fairfield, you'll find sage grouse. And all these animals call the sagebrush ecosystem home. Now, the sagebrush steppe is a lot different than it used to be because wildfire trends have changed dramatically. It is estimated that fire historically occurred in big sagebrush communities every 50 to 100 years. In the Wyoming sagebrush country, which is considered to be the most drought tolerant of all the sagebrushes. Wyoming big sagebrush is typically found in Nevada, but right now we in the lower Boise foothills are in basin big sagebrush country, which is a taller sagebrush than Wyoming big sagebrush. But areas with mountain big sagebrush, which is another subspecies of sagebrush, which you'll find around Bogus Basin, there's historically fire frequency was every 15 to 25 years. The role of fire in basin big sagebrush country is somewhere in between. So historians estimate that perhaps fire return interval, or when you would see fire in the landscape, would be every 50 years. As you know, this is not the case right now. So this is a picture of historic sagebrush communities, and you can still find some of these intact communities around, but not necessarily here in Boise. And the important part of this picture are those inner spaces. So you'll see there's sagebrush, there's bunch grasses, and then there's these large inner spaces. And that's what created the longer length of fire return intervals. There were these inner spaces that didn't have any vegetation in them. So when a fire occurred, lightning would strike, it would burn in a patchwork type framework. So there would be some burning that would happen and then it would stop because of a lack of vegetation due to a relic fire or an inner space. And it would burn this patchwork kind of mosaic across the landscape. Now the fire cycles are very, very different. Fire return intervals are considered to be every 7 to 15 years if you look at the research. However, arguably, if you look between here and Mountain Home, you could say that the fire return interval is every single year. Places are burning every single year, over and over again. And what that is resulting in is a cheatgrass dominated community. Sagebrush takes time to recover. Sagebrush needs 25, 30, 50 years to reestablish on the landscape. And when it's burning every single year, sagebrush cannot adequately recover, and the result is more cheatgrass. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about cheatgrass in another couple slides, but cheatgrass is very, very common in the landscape, and sagebrush is becoming much more sparse. This map that you're seeing right now shows historic fire patterns, perimeters that have occurred over the western US over the last 2 decades. The different sagebrush communities are green, and red are the fires that burned sagebrush dominated landscapes. Orange are fires that burned another vegetation type. So you can see fires in California burning in Chaparral, but you can see that sagebrush is definitely actively burning. Between 20 and 2018, over 15 million acres of sagebrush in the Great Basin burned. And fires were starting to get much larger. Prior to 1950, which is outside of this timeline, fires typically weren't over 10,000 acres because of that mosaic pattern of burning that I discussed previously. However, from 2014 to 2018, almost double that. So in 4 years, we had more than half of what burned in the last 20 years burned. So as you can see, the increase of fires is exponential. And also we're entering into this new fire regime that folks are coining mega fires. It's not uncommon to see a fire over 100,000 acres. And 100,000 acres is arguably small when you look at the situations in California, where there's frequently 500,000 acre fires. And this is obviously really problematic. And one of the major driving forces behind this change in fire return intervals is cheatgrass. Cheatgrass short circuits a lot of important ecological cycles. For example, cheatgrass has a shallow root system. Most of the roots are concentrated in the top 12 inches of soil. So it absorbs much of the water and nutrients that during spring can outcompete the native plants that need that water. We live in a desert environment, so water is a limited resource. When cheatgrass steals it, the native plants can't thrive, hence no more sagebrush on the landscape. And the loss of native plants means losing their healthy, deeper rooted systems, which create healthy soils. Cheatgrass also affects the diversity and abundance of soil microorganisms, which may reduce the ability of native plants to grow in the future. As for wildlife, the biggest threat from cheatgrass is the loss of habitat due to increased wildfires, the conversion of diverse native plant communities to monocultures of annual grass. The scene in this picture is not uncommon to the lower Boise foothills. This is a sea of cheatgrass. That beautiful amber hue that we see on the foothills is typically a combination of cheatgrass and other invasive annual grasses. So now those longer fire patterns that I discussed 2 slides ago have definitely changed. And now there's cheatgrass wildfire, which results in more cheatgrass and more wildfire. And this is considered to be the primary threat to sagebrush lands right now, is this cheatgrass fire cycle. These grasses provide continuous fine fuels that ignite easily, increasing fire occurrence and spread. And after fire, cheatgrass recovers rapidly and outcompetes the natives, just like we discussed. Native plants like sagebrush don't recover because they cannot burn that frequently, and eventually they'll disappear from the landscape, resulting in these very flammable monocultures of cheatgrass. And unfortunately for us here in the lower Boise foothills, there are other non-native grasses that are also altering fire regimes. Ventenata dubia, also known as African window grass, is very common in Halls Gulch and Military Reserve. If you're familiar with the foothills, if you go walking, you're going to see it in July and August. It looks like this. This is obviously doesn't look like a lot, but if you want to know more about Ventenata, feel free to contact me. This is a new invader to our area. Also, Medusa head is really problematic. Medusa head rye has a very high silica content, and as a result, it does not photodegrade in the sun, which means even more flammable thatch on the ground with the cheatgrass. And finally, feral rye, cereal rye, is very, very common in Halls Gulch, Military Reserve, Hidden Lakes. It's that very tall grass that you walk through come June, July, and August. And this grass was brought in likely by the city of Boise at one time for erosion control, and is still frequently seen in erosion control mixes. It has escaped and is really, really problematic. So all of these non-native grasses on our open space resources create a wildfire hazard. And the way we can, and how we can live with this, is to mitigate that wildfire hazard. But please keep in mind that fire is a natural part of this ecosystem. However, not as it is currently because of these changes in the vegetation that's out there. So what does the city do to mitigate the risk of wildfire? Well, we do a whole bunch of different things, and I'm going to talk about some of the activities that we're undertaking, but in all sincerity, and Jerry's going to go into this, homeowners are the first line of defense, but the city is here to help and partner with you. And I'll talk about some of the programs that we have in place where we can work together to mitigate the risk of wildfire. One of the big low-hanging fruit fire mitigation strategies that many municipalities use is mowing. This is a picture of a quick cut mower. The city just procured our very own quick cut mower. And this is a slope mower. So it's meant to work on slopes up to 45 degrees. And we mow cereal rye primarily in mid-June, as well as again in mid-July. We do not do any mowing after July 1st, because that is the official start of fire season. And we don't want to spark a fire using our own equipment. Mowing reduces hazardous fuels on the landscape. It cuts them down. It doesn't allow them to grow tall and to build up. Also, when you mow in June as well as again in July, you can stop cereal rye from reproducing. And I'm going to talk a little bit about doing restoration here in a moment, but stopping cereal rye from reproducing is important because hopefully over time we can change what the landscape looks like from cereal rye to more native perennial bunch grasses. This is a picture of mowing out at Hyatt Hidden Lakes. I just used this one so that you could see how tall the cereal rye is when it's not cut versus when it's cut. So think about the fire risk associated with tall, unmanaged cereal rye. It's extremely problematic. And the way we determine where we mow is by looking at the wildfire risk map, which Jerry may talk about, the Interra platform, where you can go and look at where there is a high risk of wildfire, which was developed with consultants and using a whole bunch of geospatial tools. And we were able to see what areas of our property on open space reserves had the highest risk of wildfire. And so these are the places where we mow. We also use observational data as well as trail counts to see where there's a lot of people. We like to mow in areas where there's high traffic, because think about somebody smoking a cigarette or kids playing games or setting off fireworks. Where there's people, there's typically wildfire. 86% of wildfires are human caused. So these are places where we have mowed in 2019 as well as 2020, and we're hoping to expand our mowing program moving forward. Here's a picture of Halls Gulch before and after mowing. The Foothills Learning Center is to the left. I don't know if you're familiar with this junction, but just so you can see how tall cereal rye is before mowing and after mowing. And you know, we're optimistic that mowing can reduce the risk of wildfire to our open space reserves and then to the communities that surround them. Another really big, exciting wildfire mitigation project that we're going to undertake is at Stack Rock. Stack Rock is obviously not directly abutting any communities, but it is definitely, it is a source of a potential wildfire hazard. So it's our only forested property. It's directly adjacent to the Bogus Basin Sinker Creek area. And we have owned Stack Rock for 20 some odd years, and no management has occurred on this property since it became ours. And I don't know about the management history of the area. But Stack Rock is heavily utilized, really beautiful spot. And there is a lot of blowdowns as well as mistletoe infections on Doug fir. And there's also an overstocking of trees across the board because there's been no management there in history or reports of management. So you can see some pictures here of blowdowns. And what our plan is to reduce hazardous woody debris on the landscape by piling it, by chipping it, by burning it, so that there's less of a wildfire risk hazard up there. Mistletoe is harming Doug fir trees, and it's likely because of climate change. And if you want to know more about mistletoe infections, I highly recommend you look at the U.S. Forest Service reports on mistletoe and Doug fir. But what's happening is, because the climate's changing and the trees are becoming more stressed up at Bogus Basin, they're much more susceptible to a parasitic plant infection called mistletoe. And this causes the plants to die. And then once again, they're standing dead, and they pose a fire hazard when they're in high density. So our plan is to work in partnership with the Idaho Department of Lands and the U.S. Forest Service Sinker Creek Project. If you've been up to Bogus Basin, you've likely seen some of the work that they're doing up there. Please keep in mind that they are doing commercial timber harvesting, and we will not be doing that. So when you look at the work that's happening around Bogus Basin, that will look much different than the work that we're going to do on city property. On city property, we're going to target smaller trees and dense stands and leave the much larger, more ecologically important trees on the landscape. And we are also going to target those blowdowns and try and remove some of that woody debris from the landscape. Contractors will begin stacking and hauling out debris in summer 2021. The work needs to occur towards the end of summer because there are engraver beetles or Ips beetles that can create their homes in the piles of slash, and that creates for a really big problem the following year. So if you pile late enough in the summer, you won't have issues with Ips beetle, but that's why that timeline is going to happen. Those piles will cure, the piles of woody debris and slash will cure, whatever's hauled out will be cured for Boise fire to burn in winter of 2022. So that will be prescribed fire in piles during the winter months. And stay tuned. Right now, we just got done collecting pre-treatment project data. So we have an inventory of what our forest looks like up there. I'm working in collaboration with the U.S. Forest Service to determine what kind of prescriptions we're going to use. And all of that data will be publicly available. There will also be information about trail closures likely coming up in January, February, March of next year. So you'll be well informed about what's happening and when. I just wanted to put this on people's radar that this is a big upcoming project. Also, I'm working diligently to try and build resilience and resistance on the landscape. So researchers and managers alike have emphasized the need to implement management actions. Management actions are treatments like mowing, that will increase the resilience of native ecosystems to stress and disturbance and enhance the resistance to invasion by cheatgrass. Resilience is a pretty big buzzword that you'll hear multiple times throughout the rest of this talk, but resilience is the capacity of an ecosystem to regain its fundamental structure when it's been stressed by something like wildfire. Resistance, on the other hand, is the capacity of an ecosystem to retain its fundamental structure processes despite stresses like invasive species like cheatgrass. Resistance to invasion by invasive species is increasingly important in rangeland ecosystems, and we want to build resilience on the landscape. Management treatments aim to increase resilience to disturbance, enhance resistance by reducing hazardous fuels, and then increasing the native perennial herbaceous species. So I'm showing you this picture because you can see that there's a lot of cheatgrass, but there's also perennial bunch grasses. And these perennial bunch grasses are really important because they not only compete with cheatgrass, but look at how green they are compared to the cheatgrass on the landscape. And the fire hazard is obviously much less when there's green vegetation. It doesn't burn so readily. And so accompanying the mowing treatments, there will be some active building of resistance and resilience through revegetation and restoration. So this is a little piece of art that Sage Step has put out about resilient and resistant land and all those topics I discussed around there. But as you can see, resistant land is really important because it can deal with cheatgrass invasion, and then resilient land can recover from a disturbance readily. So think about Table Rock, for example. Table Rock burned in 2016. And if you go there now, you'll see that the restoration treatments we did were largely successful. There's perennial bunch grasses, there's shrubs back on the landscape. And these help reduce the risk of wildfire because they stay green longer, there isn't that flammable thatch, and they also provide wildlife habitat. So moving forward in the areas where we mow, I'm going to actively be doing projects to reseed as well as revegetate those areas. So perennial bunch grasses play important roles in ecosystem resilience or recovery. And they can also come back quite readily after wildfire. So if there's a wildfire, if there's perennial bunch grasses, those grasses can come back and compete with that cheatgrass that comes back so quickly after a wildfire burns. They're also highly competitive.
Hey, Martha.
Yeah.
We've got a quick question in here in the chat box. Is there any kind of mitigation needed along the Bethine Church Nature Trail? If so, is anything being done?
That's a great question. So we removed hazardous fuels or built up woody debris I believe I'm trying to remember the timeline, last fall. So last fall I was in there with a group of volunteers and we removed woody debris. That was controversial because lots of people say that woody debris provides habitat for wildlife. So is there a need for it? I think so. I think some of that dead and down debris that's just accumulating is problematic. Does some of it provide wildlife habitat? Yes. And how do we meet the balance? I'm not certain. But I can tell you that we have staff right now working on a plan for managing the Bethany Church with that woody debris accumulation in mind. And so I think that there's now going to be a plan to have community forestry come in on an annual basis and just remove limbs that have fallen, remove cottonwoods that are dead, as long as they aren't quality infrastructure that's providing habitat for wildlife. So it's important to find the balance there, but the answer is yes. It was a long question, long answer, I apologize.
No, thanks, Martha.
Yep. Okay, and I was just saying perennial native grasses are highly competitive for available resources like water, and they are also a strong indicator of resilience to disturbance. So as we move forward in those areas where we mow, there will be reseeding efforts with native perennial bunch grasses. And I'm optimistic that over time we will get a handle on some of that cereal rye. Also, I just wanted to bring to you guys' attention that we are using science to try and combat some of these invasive species issues. This is a slide from the Nature Conservancy, and they decided not to use our property, but I had lots of discussions with them earlier this summer about using some of our property as a test site for some new seed coat technology. And what the seed coat technology does is when you seed these native perennial bunch grasses, they come with an herbicide capsule around them. And what that does is that allows for them to establish before cheatgrass or other invasive annuals can steal all the available soil water resources from them, and that will allow them to establish. And so there's interesting new novel technologies coming out, like these seed coatings, like weed suppressive bacteria. And we are actively looking at scientific journals and research and trying to use the best available technology to do restoration as well as promote fire resiliency on the landscape. And, you know, I don't always have the right answers and I frequently have the wrong answer, but I can tell you that using science and moving forward with monitoring, we can hopefully get a handle on some of these invasive species issues that cause fire problems on open space reserves. So what programs do we currently have in place for homeowners to mitigate the risk, especially if you're living directly adjacent to an open space reserve? So the next couple of slides will be about folks who live directly adjacent to open space reserves. So we have a citizen fuel reduction policy permitting process. And what that allows is for homeowners to go out to the open space reserve that's directly abutting their home and weed whack the grass 20 feet behind their home. If you live on a place with a particularly steep slope, or you have a much more inherent risk of wildfire to your property, you're more than welcome to reach out to me and we can change that allowable space to weed whack. I'm saying weed whack because we don't allow for metal blades, so you can't go out there and mow. So weed whacking is the way to do it. But why I wanted to talk to you about this is many of you are aware of this policy permit, but what you can also do is get native seed. So if you are a participant in the Citizen Fuel Reduction Policy permitting process, if you want to reseed that area behind your landscape with native perennial bunch grasses, I can provide that to you, okay? And you may, if you water those seeds, you may be able to get a more fire resistant and resilient landscape behind your house. And not only does that meet the goals of fire mitigation, but it also really helps enhance the wildlife habitat in the area. So I highly recommend, if you're a participant, please reach out to me and get some seed. To participate in the program, you need to go to adafireadapted.org and click on the homeowner tab. And there's an educational video on there, which you can see what's allowable underneath the permit. And then you can contact me if you want seed. The permit's good for 1 year with the option to renew. We're also this year, thanks to a Western State Fire Managers Grant from Idaho Department of Lands, we are offering a neighborhood chipping program. There's been neighborhood chipping programs in the past. This one is a little bit different because you must receive a wildfire safety home evaluation to participate. I believe Jerry's going to talk more about this, so I will stand down. But once again, if you go to adafireadapted.org and you click on the homeowner tab, you can participate in neighborhood chipping. And what that means is you get this home safety evaluation, you have woody debris that needs to go, you leave it on your curb, and we come and get it. Just wanted to reiterate some really important parts of the program. This is a blurry picture and I stole it from the internet, but this is a nicely piled pile of woody debris that a chipper could come pick up. Okay, it's the butt ends are out, it's piled nicely. Staff can just easily pick this up and throw it into the chipper. This is also a really nice picture of appropriately piled woody debris. If piles of debris are left haphazardly on the curb, or if they don't meet the standards, and we do have a flyer if you want it, I'm more than happy to send it to you. We will not pick up that debris. It just causes a hassle for us. And so please, when you participate in the program, pile your debris appropriately. So if you're interested in learning more about any of the projects that I talked about, or are interested in citizen fuel reduction policy permit, please reach out to me. I'm here and always available, and definitely interested in helping promote a more resilient and resistant landscape in our open space reserves and beyond. And so with that said, do we have any other questions?
Hey, Martha, we have one question that came in just now. Does the city have plans to create fire-wise parks in neighborhoods with high wildfire risk?
Jerry, I don't know if you can speak to the Idaho Firewise program, but I guess my initial answer is no, the city doesn't have plans. That may have to come from a neighborhood or homeowners association. Is that how you perceive that, Jerry?
Well, and I would agree in terms of what would be considered a Firewise park, you know, and maybe I'm not reading the question correctly, but you know, the City of Boise Parks Department has a master siting plan for all of the parks. And as the city expands, you know, they want to continue to provide those services to the community and create parks and that sort of thing. You know, because the City of Boise has a city wildfire mitigation team and the Parks Department sits on that team, when a new park goes in, like the Bowler Park out by Surprise Valley, you know, there's good discussion on leaving some native vegetation, providing maybe a Firewise demonstration site in terms of Firewise plants and that sort of thing. And aside from that, you know, the city does manage all those open space reserves like Martha had mentioned, and those are left in a somewhat natural state, if you will. They're meant to be that way. And what Martha had just discussed is some of those sites, you know, she's really working hard using, you know, current best practices and science to try to figure out a way to restore some of those sites to a more native, more fire resistant plant community. So I don't know if that answers the question or not, but I hope so. And if not, please feel free to throw another question out there and clarify.
All right, Jerry, I'm stopping my share and I'm going to pull up Wahova.
Okay. Yep, that sounds good.
Okay.
And I am going to go in and share my screen. Let's take just 1 second here. All right. All right, Martha, can you see my screen?
I can, it looks good.
Okay. All right, so fire adapted communities, I'm going to go through kind of an in-depth depiction of what a fire adapted community is, and talk about how, you know, what the city is doing, some of the things that Martha has already mentioned, some of the programs out there like Firewise USA, some of the non-governmental organizations or NGOs like Idaho Firewise, and what they're doing here locally and that kind of thing, and give you a good overview of our area, the different sort of efforts that are taking place here locally, and then what you can do to get involved. So I'll have a few short videos for you, and we'll kind of roll through this. So in terms of fire adapted communities, the term fire adapted community came out of the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy. So this is something where the federal government went out, did listening tours around the country. They came to Boise. I want to say it was back in like 2012 or 2013. And they came through our area. Myself and the fire chief at the time went and attended that session and provided feedback. And you know, we provided feedback based on, you know, the environment that we live in, the ecology or ecological environment that we live in, which, as Martha depicted, was a stage step. Without really introducing myself, so I'm going to stop for just a moment and introduce myself. I'm Jerry McAdams. I'm the current acting fire marshal for the Boise Fire Department. I am a captain in our fire prevention division since I've been on the department for 20 years this October. In fact, in 3 days, October 23rd, 2020, that'll be my 20 years. I was a line firefighter. I was in a situation at one point where I was driving a brush rig up on a crow-in fire back in like 2004, I think it was, and our crew was almost overrun by wildfire. It was a near-miss incident. We had to fill out a near-miss incident report on that. And so I'm very familiar with wildfire and the effects of wildfire. I'm a certified wildfire mitigation specialist through the National Fire Protection Association, and I sat on the board of directors for the International Association of Wildland Fire, was on the editorial board for Wildfire Magazine. I teach as a contract instructor on my days off for the National Fire Protection Association, and go around the country teaching 2-day classes on assessing structure ignition potential for wildfire. So what it is that actually burns homes and structures to the ground during a wildfire event. I'm super passionate about wildfire mitigation and partnering with homeowners and NGOs and other stakeholders in our area in particular to reduce our threat from wildfire. I love Boise. I'm a 5th generation Idahoan. One side of the family homesteaded out of Eagle, the other side homesteaded out of Mans Creek by Weiser. So I am invested in our community. I feel privileged to be able to serve our community, and so that's my introduction. So as part of the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy, fire adapted communities, or that term, came about. And there's 3 goals of the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy. And those 3 goals are effective firefighter response, building resilient landscapes, and then creating fire adapted communities. And they all intertwine and they work together. Fire adapted communities is the idea that we're all in this together. We all need to, you know, play our part. And wildfire is everyone's fight. And if you live in a wildland urban interface area that is prone to wildfire, that has a historical wildfire regime, you need to learn to live with fire. And so that's what that's about. And I'll go through a few slides here to show you kind of a graphical depiction of what that area partnership looks like in terms of building fire adapted communities. So as I talked about, fire is a natural part of the environment. I don't want you to go away from this presentation thinking that wildfire is bad. Fire is good. Fire is a tool in the toolbox that we rarely use anymore because the media has depicted, wildfires being bad for so long. Early 1900s, we had the 10 a.m. policy. After the big burn in Idaho, Montana, several states were affected by it. Forest Service came out with a policy, if you will, that we're going to put out every single fire. And then shortly thereafter was the 10 a.m. policy. We're going to put out every fire by 10 a.m. And, it has led to unhealthy ecosystems on the landscape. So if you look at some of these large scale wildfires that we're having around the country, historically, you would have burn scars on the landscape where you would have had a wildfire, maybe 50,000 acres, and it burned into a burn scar from a previous wildfire, and that fire went out at that point or died down to the point where suppression resources could get a handle on it. Now it's not like that. You look at Gatlinburg, Tennessee, a couple of years ago, they lost 2,400 structures. It was a significant wildfire, burned lots of homes. It started in the national park and burned out of the national park. But the understory was not managed for years and years and years, decades, and it was unhealthy in terms of the ecosystem, and that's the kind of catastrophic fires we're having all the time now. So anyway, this idea that fire is bad, I guess we need to get over that and realize that if we actually use prescribed fire where and when it should be used, we won't have these large catastrophic wildfires like we're having, or we will lessen the impact of these large catastrophic wildfires. So again, this fire adapted communities principle is part of the environment. We chose to live in those areas. We have to adapt to the way we think and the way we build, the way we design our landscaping, and the way we live within these areas. We need to engage with our community partners, and we need to create a more fire adapted community. So here's a good graphic, kind of shows all the different components of a fire adapted community. So you've got healthy forests and land management. You've got home preparedness, and that's where the homeowners come into play. And as Martha said, homeowners are the first line of defense. Everything that they do around their homes to protect themselves from the threat of wildfire makes all the difference in the world. And it allows firefighting resources to do their job better, more effectively, and more efficiently so that we have that effective firefighter response. Government participation in planning, that is, your local government, state, national government. Locally, we have our City of Boise Wildfire Mitigation Team, which is comprised of the Parks Department, Fire Department, Public Works, Planning and Development Services, members of the Mayor's Office. We have a team of individuals that meet together approximately once a month to go over wildfire mitigation planning for the future. Collaborative partnerships, again, we've talked about that, looking at our NGOs like Idaho Firewise, some of our colleges and universities. Boise State University has the Hazard and Climate Resiliency Institute, College of Western Idaho, and Idaho Firewise, which is a not-for-profit, and the Boise Fire Department get together and teach classes to landscapers, landscape architects, nurseries, that sort of thing, and certify them as being, they take a test and essentially are certified as being a Firewise organization. Business resilience is awfully important. If you look at the Waldo Canyon fire, several years back, there were millions lost in the economy due to businesses being shut down and trucking resources not being able to get in and out of the area. If you look at Ashland, Oregon 2 years ago, because of the smoke in the air, their Shakespeare Festival lost over $1 million in revenue. So business resilience is super important, and not only with businesses that could potentially burn to the ground, but businesses that are affected by smoke in the area due to wildfires. Fire department planning, that's awfully important, and that's where I come into play as wildfire mitigation specialist. We look at our best use of resources and training and that sort of thing, but we also look at a bigger picture, looking at all of the values at risk, and that's our watersheds, our critical infrastructure, our critical wildlife habitat, and that sort of thing. Large rangeland fires in the United States, and this is not a depiction of forest fires. This is simply rangeland fires. So from 1970 to 2007, rangeland fires larger than 300 acres. You can see Southwest Idaho is a hot spot for that, and we do get a significant number of fires here. Historical ignitions. So this is a graphical depiction of ignitions in the Boise front from 1959 to 2010. All of the yellow lightning strikes that you see there are just that. They are lightning strikes. And all of the red fires you see on the landscape there, those are human-caused fires. And so during that time frame, 86% of the fires on the landscape were human-caused. And that's significant. It's noteworthy, and it's something that needs to be addressed. Wildfire frequency, again, from 1959 to 2009, you can see depiction there of burn scars across the landscape. And we've had a significant number of fires. Almost everything is burned at one point or another, and it will continue to burn. That's the type of environment we live in. We're not going to get away from wildfire, so we have to learn to live with it. Our wildland urban interface zones, we've got a valley zone, which is the yellow section down below, and we have a foothill zone, and those have different wildland urban interface codes and standards that go along with those particular zones. They incorporate home hardening. So for new homes built in a wildland urban interface environment, they have to meet a certain standard for fire resistance. The landscaping has to have defensible space, and there's a lot of codes that go into that. Those are all listed in Title V of Boise City Code, if you care to look those up. The Oregon Trail fire back in 2008, I'm going to show this video real quick, and hopefully it'll play for you. If you can't hear the sound, throw it out in the chat that you can't hear, but hopefully you'll be able to hear it. Oh.
Police in Boise, Idaho say one woman died in wildfires that ripped through a hillside neighborhood. 17 police officers and one firefighter were treated for various injuries.
We know that officers helped to evacuate over 50 homes last night in some of the worst conditions with smoke inhalation. We know lives were saved because of their efforts, the efforts of other emergency responders in the Boise Fire Department.
At least 19 homes were destroyed or damaged in the fire that started Monday evening.
You know, the conditions we had today, I called it a perfect storm. We had a red flag warning with winds of over 50 miles an hour. We had hot, dry conditions, and we had a sloped surface with shake roofs. And all that combined, it was amazing that we kept this to only 19 houses that were affected.
Just the amount of devastation to the individual homes is just something that I don't think you can prepare for.
Officials say people who lost their homes have remained upbeat.
I was just so taken, and here are some of those folks right here, just with their attitudes. I mean, although they'd lost everything they had, their families, at least in all but one case, are safe.
The fire started in a vacant field of sagebrush and spread up a ridge to a line of homes. Matt Friedman, The Associated Press.
All right, I'm going to show one more video of the Oregon Trail fire from down below. I'm not going to share the whole video, but you get the idea that in that particular instance, you know, we had a high wind event. So we had 50-mile-an-hour plus winds. We had a tree down the line that hit some power lines, sent a surge down the power lines. And what caused this fire was molten aluminum coming from the power lines onto the dry vegetation below, and it sparked that fire. It then ran up the hill. There was a particular home on the hill that had not maintained their vegetation around their house very well. Their house was combustible construction, and it ignited very readily. That particular home burnt to the ground, as well as 10 others. And if you look at the devastation afterwards, this is what it looked like afterwards. It was significant. And you see the 3 houses across the street that are burned down in this area here, across the street. Those weren't direct flame impingement. Those were embers landing in ignitable material around the homes and igniting those homes. And so, we had a fire captain up there at the time who had a helmet cam and was running video. And if you can imagine a blizzard of snow, which we're probably going to see here in the next few weeks in our area, because that's just the area that we live in. But if you can imagine that, but embers, that's what it looked like. Embers were landing everywhere. They were landing on roofs across the street, igniting roofs. Some of the homeowners, were able to put out the spot fires around their houses. The ones that were home, some of them weren't, but those homes burned down because there was ignitable material around those homes, and you had embers landing all over the place, thousands of embers landing around those homes. And consequently, we lost 10, 21 were damaged in total. And unfortunately, the worst part of that whole scenario was we lost a life. A BSU professor, she couldn't get out of her home at the time, and she perished, and that was just tragic. If you look at this graphical depiction, it shows the houses that were burned to the ground. They're depicted by red stars. The orange triangles are homes that were severely damaged, and then you've got the green triangles, which are homes that were damaged, but not severely. All right, so talking about defensible space. So what can you do as a homeowner to protect yourself from wildfire? Again, look at those ignition vulnerabilities and start with the home and start moving out from there. So if you, what is did as the immediate zone on this particular graphic, it's 0 to 5 feet. And you want to look and make sure that you don't have anything in that area that can ignite. So your patio furniture should be fire resistant. And you can look at the tags on your patio furniture when you buy it and make sure that it's labeled as fire resistant. You don't want wood stacked up against your house, bark mulch. You want to replace that kind of stuff with rock mulch, any arborvitaes, junipers, any hazardous flammable plant material. Including your decorative grasses like pampas grass, that kind of thing. Lavender, super common right around the front entryway of people's homes, but it's very fragrant because it's chock full of oil. And so lavender is a great thing to have more than 5 feet away from your house. So, just those kind of things are the things that you want to think about with that immediate zone. Cleaning off your roof lines and gutters, and making sure that you have proper venting in your soffits. So you've got 1/8 inch or finer metal mesh screening, so embers can't get up into your soffits and that kind of thing. From there, you move out into that intermediate zone, which is 5 to 30 feet. And you can start having some low stature, more hazardous plants in that area, so long as they're low stature and they're away from your house, and they're not in a bunch of clumps like a big long line of arborvitae bushes, providing you privacy from your neighbors. When that ignites and you've got a combustible home, your house is going to ignite. And so, taking those kind of things into consideration, having low stature plants, that if you have a low stature plant, low lying juniper, for instance, that is small and 10 feet from your house, if that ignites, it's not going to affect your house. So you don't want a succession of things lined up in a row to where you've got that igniting and then something else next to it and something else, and that transfer of heat going from one thing to another to eventually ignite your house. And so you're looking at those ignition vulnerabilities and mitigating your risk. Same thing with your outbuildings, garages, your roof lines, ceiling cracks so embers can't get in there, making sure that your vents are properly sealed with 1/8-inch metal mesh screening, that kind of thing. From the intermediate zone out to the extended zone, 30 to 100 feet, a lot of folks don't have that sort of space on their properties, but if you do, then you can start having, a little more hazardous vegetation out, as you get further away from there. But taking that whole home ignition zone thing into play, you really want to focus on that immediate zone first and then go from there. And you can get way more information on Firewise USA, their website. They've got all sorts of information. If you look at tree spacing, again, as you go out, you can have, greater flexibility in terms of what type of vegetation you plant, your tree spacing, and that sort of thing. There is a good home ignition zone checklist on the Firewise website, and you guys can check that out at firewise.org if you would like. All right, this YouTube video I'm gonna skip because of time. And this next video, this guy's kind of a goofball, but he's pretty smart, so. All right, that's terrible, terrible beginning of the video.
So I'm a wildfire mitigation specialist with the Boise Fire Department, and this is a very fire-prone ecosystem. Okay, we live in a sage steppe area where wildfire is part of life. It's always been part of life here, and will continue to be so. If you're in the city, you're going to be affected by smoke. If you live in the fringe, what we call our wildland-urban interface, you're also going to be affected. If we get a good wind-blown fire, you're going to have embers landing around your home up to a mile away from the fire front. And so folks that, are even several roads into a neighborhood are affected by ember intrusion and that kind of thing, right? In my view, homeowners are really critical. They're a first line of defense. What they do matters greatly. And so if a homeowner can make their home survivable to where we don't have to feel like we have to protect that home and we can actually put out the fire sooner, that protects homeowners. It keeps the fire from growing and threatening more homes, more homeowners, and more firefighters. We had the 8th Street fire, and there was one home that ended up burning, and it was because they had an arborvitae bush right up underneath a soffit vent. And so an ember landed in that arborvitae, got the arborvitae going right up underneath that soffit vent, which burned up into the attic of that house and burnt the roof off of the house. That is the only thing that caused that house to ignite, was that one single arborvitae bush that was in the wrong spot, for that home. That homeowner could have protected their home by making sure that they didn't have any flammable vegetation right up against their home, but they probably weren't aware, right? And so it's really important that homeowners gain some awareness and some understanding of those ignition vulnerabilities and what will cause problems for them during a wildfire event. We're all in this together, right? Wildfire is everyone's fight. So we're working together in a partnership. Homeowners are doing their part, hardening their home, doing proper vegetation management to where their homes can be standalone, survivable, and then wildland firefighters and firefighters in general can do their job, get the fire put out sooner, which threatens less homes, less lives, less property.
All right.
So I'm a wildfire.
All right, so we had a question come in. Let me look here real quick. I thought I saw a question come in.
I didn't see a question, Jerry. I'm trying to watch, so I'll let you know if I see something. And if you asked a question, please re-ask it. We didn't get it.
Okay. All right, for evacuation planning, this is a common question that we get. People want to know what they can do to be informed, and so that they're aware of any sort of, wildfire, earthquake, that kind of thing, natural disaster. You can go on the Ada County website. The link is there. That's a horrible looking link, but if you can jot it down, or you can just search it on their website, Ada County Code Red, and sign up for Code Red. It's really easy. You can put multiple phone numbers in there from various members of your family, and it sends them a text message. And what I did is I did that for my entire family, and then when it sent me the test, I saved that phone number in there as my favorites, so it would still, I had my phone set up so my favorites still come through even if I have my phone on do not disturb and that kind of thing. So that's something that you can do. A lot of folks have mentioned that they shut their phone down at night or put it on do not disturb. You can set your phone up so that you can still get your favorites through there and that kind of thing. Code Red will alert you if there's any sort of imminent threat in your area, whether it's wildfire or that sort of thing. If there's an evacuation going on in your area, it will alert you as to that as well. And you can read more information on their website about that. Looking at this depiction of Warm Springs Mesa. So there's 3 ways in, 3 ways out. If we are coming in, as an emergency response, and we're coming in off of Windsong, and there's a fire up in the Mesa, the Mesa should plan an evacuation appropriately in terms of going down and out the other 2 routes, and then moving away from the fire. If the fire is on the west side of the Mesa, it makes sense to go east. If the fire is on the east side of the Mesa, it makes sense to go down and head west. And so, we do not plan evacuation processes for neighborhoods. We really hope and wish that neighborhoods out there will work together as a team and figure out their evacuation protocol for themselves. And so they're invested in it, and so that they know the plan. We can give you a plan, but that's not the best way to go about evacuation planning. So, all right, what the city of Boise is doing, we've got a dedicated mitigation and restoration and fuel staff. So we've got myself, the wildfire mitigation specialist, Martha Brabeck, she's our restoration ecologist for the foothills. And then we have a part-time wildfire fuel mitigation specialist, if you will. And she does chipping work, she does home evaluations and that sort of thing. I'll go more into the home evaluations here shortly. We have a City of Boise wildfire mitigation team, which we talked about. We've got an Ada County Fire Adapted Working Group, or ADAFAC, and that is comprised of BLM, Forest Service, Healthy Hills Initiative, Ada Soil and Water Conservation District, Idaho Fish and Game, Idaho Department of Lands, the Boise Fire Department, Eagle Fire Department, Idaho Firewise. It's just a smattering of stakeholders out there that are all interested in the same thing, and there's homeowners that are present at those meetings as well, and really just taking a holistic approach, if you will, on making sure everybody has a voice in terms of wildfire mitigation in our area. We have a community wildfire protection plan, which is part of our Ada County multi-hazard mitigation plan. It's been crosswalked into that document, so it's one document. And there's different initiatives within that document describing things that we want to do and that we're striving to do in our area in terms of wildfire mitigation and preparedness. And you can look on the Ada County Emergency Management website if you want to take a look at that. We have different funding opportunities for mitigation and restoration. The City of Boise has provided funding in the past through neighborhood reinvestment grants. They no longer do that. There's another program if you are wanting signage, for instance, in your neighborhood, or you want to create a demonstration project you know, showcasing, you know, Firewise plants or something in one of your neighborhood common areas, there's funding for that sort of thing. And so you can reach out to myself, you know, and I can get you started on the right foot as far as that goes.
Jerry,
Yes.
we have a question.
Yeah.
So many of the wildfires in California, Oregon, and Washington look like they're occurring in neighborhoods like the ones we have in Boise. Yet if I asked my neighbors, they'd probably say nothing like that could happen in our neighborhood, River Run, where we are on a mature and lush landscape. What are your thoughts on that?
So, yeah, we could have a significant wildfire here. You know, the differences in landscape, you know, there are differences in the ecology. So I did some private fire investigation work down in Napa and Santa Rosa in 2017, and hiking through the hills of Napa and Santa Rosa and looking at the devastation after the Tubbs fire there, and cataloging equipment and just looking, you know, at everything that transpired there. You know, the vegetation is very different. It's not the sage steppe environment. Okay, and we traditionally look at our foothills and we're like, yeah, there's a wildfire hazard there, but it's grasses and shrubs, right? It's not as significant as, or, you know, a forested area in California, or an area in California with, you know, extremely tall chaparral, right? That is the perception that a lot of people have, and I would say that that's not accurate. So when you look at a sage steppe fire, you know, that's burning in, you know, cheatgrass, knee-high cheatgrass and shrubs, and you hit that first neighborhood that was platted out in the 50s, 60s, 70s, your fuel model jumps tremendously. You've got homes that are combustible. You have heavy, dense, hazardous vegetation packed between homes. If you go up in the Boise Heights neighborhood or Central Foothills neighborhood or Highlands Neighborhood Association areas, any of those areas that were platted out in the 50s and 60s, and you look at the vegetation that we have there, it's atrocious. It's scary for me, knowing what I know on how homes burn during wildfire. It scares the heck out of me to think that we might potentially one day have an Oregon Trail fire sort of occurrence where we have a high wind event in the Boise front near one of these older established communities. If we have that, chances are we're going to lose hundreds of homes. And so the thought that that can't happen here, that's just a fallacy. It can happen here. So, you know, it's, yeah, I hope that answers the question. Going back to some of what the city of Boise is doing, we have that citizen fuel reduction policy that Martha had talked about. We have various different Firewise USA sites here locally, and we are increasing that. We've got several different communities that are working on becoming Firewise USA sites right now. And I just honestly need to find the time to work with them and get their paperwork in. This year's been pretty crazy with the COVID thing and not having a fire chief. And I'm kind of doing two jobs right now. I'm doing wildfire mitigation and I'm the acting fire marshal. And it's difficult to say the least to find the time to do everything I want to do. In terms of wildfire mitigation, the wheels are still on the bus, so it hasn't crashed yet, but we are still doing wildfire mitigation, but not to the extent that I would like to see. So, so Firewise USA sites, those will be expanding. If you're interested in, you know, becoming a Firewise USA site for your particular neighborhood, we're happy to help. It may take a little while to get you there, but we're happy to help. Boise Fire Department now has a wildfire division that incorporates certain training, that sort of thing. We have updated wildland urban interface codes, so Title V, as I had mentioned previously, and you're welcome to look at that online. We have free wildfire home safety evaluation. So Marta Soderlund, she's our wildfire fuels tech, and she goes around and conducts wildfire home safety evaluations. And that's a precursor to getting the chipping that Martha had also mentioned. We provide a free chipping service to homeowners that want to make a difference on their landscape and that agree to have a free wildfire home safety evaluation. And then the follow-up to that is that they remove that hazardous vegetation, whether it's arborvitae, juniper, limbing up blue spruce, so it reduces the ladder fuels, so you don't have fire burning from the ground up into the tree, and that kind of thing. Taking dead limbs out of their deciduous trees and removing, any dead and down foliage, brush, that kind of thing. We provide that free chipping service, but again, that precursor is that free wildfire home safety evaluation. You can go on adafireadapted.org and sign up for that. There's no cost for that. It takes about 45 minutes to an hour and a half, depending upon how many questions you have and your concerns and that kind of thing. And provide that service to you as a community member. We have the woody biomass removal through the chipping, like I talked about, but I also would be remiss if I didn't mention the city's composting program. So the city has a composting program. If you live within the city of Boise and you're a resident, you're part of that program, and it's unlimited. So you can go on the city's composting website, look at how you should bundle materials, but you can put an awful lot of material out there every single week. Again, it's unlimited, and you can have that material removed and hauled off for you. All right, what can you do? You can educate yourself. You can engage with your community. That's your, if you look at it on a micro scale, your neighborhood, right? The homeowners around you, and then your community as a whole on a macro scale. You can mitigate risk around your home and property. That's number one. Again, you're the first line of defense. What you do makes all the difference in the world. And instead of trying to protect your home, our firefighting resources can put the fire out and get it out quickly. And that protects more homes, more people, and more property. Sign up for Code Red notifications. Prepare and plan. So International Association of Fire Chiefs has a Ready, Set, Go program. You can look that up online. And that's a really homeowner preparedness sort of program. You get ready by doing mitigation activities around your home. You get set by talking with your family around the dinner table about what you're going to do in the event of a wildfire or any other natural disaster for that matter. And then go is go and go early. Don't wait until the fire department tells you to evacuate or the police department tells you to evacuate. If your spidey senses are going off and you're like, I don't feel comfortable, with what's going on, leave, right? And so don't wait for somebody to tell you to leave, just leave. And, if, you have senses for a reason, and if you feel uncomfortable, go. And typically around the nation, when we're losing homeowners and wildland fire incidents, it's because they don't leave early enough. They wait until it's too late, and then they're trying to leave a community, and you've got power lines down across the road, you've got trees across the road, you've got fire burning across the road, you've got emergency vehicles trying to come into the community, you've got smoke in the air, and you can't see 50 feet down the road. That's the wrong time to be trying to evacuate. So anyway, enough said on that. Become a FireWise USA site. Incorporate defensible space requirements into your CC&Rs for your community, and we can help with that. The fire department can. Assist with home wildfire safety evaluations. Get the word out to community members and your neighbors. Let them know that that's available and where they can sign up for that. Support wildfire mitigation efforts and codes. Support prescribed fire efforts. That's a good fire on the ground at appropriate times that is, again, ecologically appropriate and effective. So support that when it comes about. Utilize resources for woody biomass removal. And then wildfire is everyone's fight. And I really like this quote. It's interesting. There's no more neutrality in the world. You either have to be part of the solution or you're going to be part of the problem. And so I would ask you to be part of the solution and partner with the City of Boise and Ada County More Fire Adapt, or adapted.org website. I would encourage you to get on that website and take a look at it. And that's, oh, Martha said I was, that I blanked out there for a minute and that I'm back. Anyway, hopefully, okay, good. So here's the last slide. It's got Martha's and my contact information. Feel free to reach out to us if you have questions. And we can do a short question and answer period right now through WOVA or HUVA or whatever you want to call it, or the chat on Zoom.
No questions, Jerry.
No questions?
Yeah, I'm not seeing any coming up.
Okay. And I am not seeing any questions either. Oh, I see Joni's on the call. Hi, Joni. So Joni, Gary, and Ann, thank you very much for attending today. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your interest. Honestly, we need more concerned citizens like yourselves that are interested in mitigating the risk of wildfire in our areas. So just thank you very much for being on this webinar today. Martha, do you have any closing thoughts?
I don't. I'll second what you said, Jerry, and I appreciate everybody's time and interest.
Oh, there is a question. How does a neighborhood become a fire-wise site? So good question. So the Firewise USA program, they have changed a little bit of their the groundwork that needs to be done to become a Firewise site. There's a community evaluation that needs to be completed, and I would come out to the community and help complete that community evaluation. That community evaluation drives the Firewise plan. And so typically a neighborhood association or a homeowners association, their board members would comprise a Firewise board for that particular area. And they would create a one-page plan that describes what they intend to do over the next 5 years in terms of mitigating risk around homes in common areas and that sort of thing. And then there's a public portal on the Firewise website, so you can actually get on there as a community and start your application process. And it'll stop you because you'll need that community evaluation. You'll need to put together a plan and that sort of thing. But you fill out all that information online on their portal and then submit it. I get an email. There's 3 of us in the state of Idaho that approve those. Myself, Ivy Dickinson with Idaho Firewise up in northern Idaho, and then Tyre Hofeltz with Idaho Department of Lands, also in northern Idaho. And we'll look at that, make sure that the application's been filled out properly, that you guys have met all the criteria, and then we'll approve it and send it to the national office. And every year, to maintain your Firewise status, you have to have $25 per home invested in mitigation activities. And that doesn't have to be cash. That can be volunteer in-kind contributions from community members. So limbing up trees, you can have homeowners doing work on their own properties and counting that as time towards mitigating risk in the community. And they just fill out a form, the amount of time that they spent. It's based on an IRS rate of $24 and change per hour. You know, for volunteer time. And so it's not really difficult for any community at all to maintain that Firewise status. I hope that made sense. And Gary said, great presentation, very helpful and enlightening. Thanks, Gary. Any other questions out there? Okay. All right, well, thank you all for your time. We really appreciate it. You all have a terrific day.
Take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.